When I first saw this climate transition bond framework from Japan, I have to admit I thought it was going to be a snooze fest. But
Mm,
the more I dug in, the more I realized just how innovative their approach is.
yeah.
It's like they took a step back and said, okay, how can we use our financial system to actually drive a real systemic shift towards a greener future?
What's fascinating is that they're not just focused on the easy wins, like slapping solar panels on everything. They're really thinking long-term, strategically, about how to make Japan a leader in the global green economy.
That's what really hooked me too. They've got this whole roadmap they call GX,
Mhm.
which stands for Green Transformation. And it's not just about reducing emissions. It's about fundamentally changing how their industries operate, how they produce and consume energy, even how people live their daily lives.
And the thing is, Japan faces some unique challenges. They're a small island nation with limited space for sprawling renewable energy projects. And they're acutely aware of their vulnerability to energy shocks, especially after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami.
So they're coming at this from a place of, we need to transition to a more sustainable future. But we also need to do it in a way that makes us more resilient and competitive.
Exactly. And that's where this climate transition bond framework comes in. Think of it as a blueprint for how they're going to use bonds to attract investment and channel funding towards those green transformation projects.
Okay, so let's dive into the specifics. How does this framework actually work? Where are they planning to focus their investments?
Well, they've identified 6 key areas, and this is where it gets really interesting. Instead of just focusing on renewable energy, which you might expect, they're taking a more holistic approach.
Give me an example.
Take energy efficiency. It might sound boring, but they're looking at everything from promoting energy-efficient homes and buildings to developing cutting-edge semiconductors that use way less power. They're even thinking about things like waste heat recovery systems for industrial processes.
So it's about squeezing more value out of every drop of energy they use, right?
Right.
Making everything from their factories to their homes more efficient.
Exactly. And they're doing the same thing with resource management. They're really pushing the idea of a circular economy where waste is minimized and resources are reused and recycled as much as possible.
That sounds like a huge undertaking. But what about the elephant in the room? Those hard-to-abate sectors. We're talking about industries like steel,
Yeah.
chemicals,
Yeah.
cement, where it's incredibly difficult to reduce emissions. What's their strategy there?
That's actually one of the most fascinating aspects of this framework. Instead of shying away from those tough sectors, they're embracing them. They see decarbonizing those industries as a critical challenge, but also a massive opportunity.
Also.
Well, if Japan can figure out how to produce steel or chemicals with significantly lower emissions, they could become global leaders in those green technologies. They could export those technologies and processes to the rest of the world, creating a whole new green industry for themselves.
So they're looking at it as a way to boost their economy, while also tackling climate change. It's a pretty savvy move, actually. But how do they plan to support those industries? Are they just going to hand out money to any company that says they're working on green tech?
Not at all. They've got a very specific model in mind, which they call regulation and support.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me.
Imagine a car manufacturer wanting to switch from making gasoline-powered cars to electric vehicles. They need to make massive investments in new factories, new technologies, and retraining their workforce. The government steps in and says, we're going to mandate stricter fuel efficiency standards, which will eventually make it impossible to sell gas guzzlers. But we're also going to provide financial support through these bonds to help you make that transition. It's a combination of pushing and pulling, of setting ambitious goals, and then providing the resources to help companies achieve them.
So it's not a free-for-all. There are clear criteria for who gets funding and what kinds of projects qualify.
Absolutely. And it's not just about reducing emissions. They're also looking at whether a project will make Japan more competitive in the global marketplace. It has to be a win-win for both the environment and the economy.
That makes a lot of sense. And they're focusing on specific sectors that are particularly difficult to decarbonize, like steel and chemicals.
Yeah.
They see those as opportunities to become global leaders in those green technologies.
Precisely. And remember, this whole framework is built on the idea of transparency and accountability. Japan plans to report annually on how the bond proceeds are being used and what kind of impact they're having.
So they're putting their money where their mouth is and then showing everyone the receipts. I like that.
It's essential for building trust with investors in the public. No one wants to see their money wasted or misused, especially when it comes to something as important as climate change. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Wait until you hear about some of the specific projects they're considering funding.
I'm all ears. Let's dive into those juicy details. Let's just keep rolling.
Let's keep going. I'm ready to blow your mind with some of these initiatives.
All right, buckle up, because we're about to go from the big picture to
Yeah.
the nitty-gritty of how Japan is planning to decarbonize its aviation sector.
Now, this is what I'm talking about. Aviation is a tough nut to crack when it comes to emissions. I mean, we're not going to be flying around in solar-powered jumbo jets anytime soon, are we?
Not exactly. But Japan is looking at a whole basket of measures, as they
Yeah.
call it, to make aviation more sustainable. And it's not just about futuristic fuels like hydrogen, which they are exploring. They're also thinking about things like optimizing air traffic management to reduce fuel burn, and even designing lighter, more aerodynamic aircraft.
So it's a multifaceted approach. What really stands out to me is their focus on sustainable aviation fuels, or SAFs.
Apps are a game changer. They're made from renewable resources like agricultural waste
What?
or even algae, and they can significantly reduce the carbon footprint of flying. It's amazing to think that we could be powering airplanes with something like used cooking oil. What I find interesting is that Japan isn't just focusing on developing these technologies domestically. They're actively looking to partner with other countries and companies to scale up production and make SAFs more commercially viable.
Exactly. They recognize that this is a global challenge that requires global solutions.
Okay, so we've got energy efficiency,
Mhm.
resource management, and green aviation. What other surprises does this climate transition bond framework have in store for us?
Well, let's talk about nuclear power. It's a bit of a hot button issue, but Japan is taking a very pragmatic approach.
I'm listening.
Carefully. They recognize that nuclear power, while not without its risks, is a carbon-free source of energy. And given their limited land area and their past experiences with energy shortages, they see it as a potentially valuable part of their energy mix.
So they're not ruling it out entirely. But how do they plan to address the safety concerns that many people have about nuclear power?
That's a key part of their strategy. They're specifically focusing on next-generation nuclear reactors, which are designed with enhanced safety features and reduced waste production. They're also emphasizing the importance of stringent regulations and transparent oversight to ensure the safe operation of these facilities.
It sounds like they're trying to thread the needle between the potential benefits of nuclear power and the very real concerns that people have. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
It will. But remember, this bond framework isn't just about funding big, splashy projects like new nuclear reactors or floating wind farms. It's also about supporting a wide range of initiatives across different sectors and scales.
Give me an example of what you mean.
Sure. Let's say you're a homeowner who wants to make your house more energy efficient. You might want to replace your old windows with thermal insulated ones, or install a heat pump water heater. Under this framework, the government could provide financial incentives, like low-interest loans or rebates, to help you make those upgrades.
So it's about empowering individuals to make greener choices,
Yeah.
not just focusing on big corporations or infrastructure projects.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where sustainability is baked into every level of the economy, from individual households to major industries.
That's really cool. It's not just a top-down approach. It's about creating a culture of sustainability from the ground up.
Hmm.
But let's go back to those hard-to-abate sectors for a moment. We talked about steel earlier. What are some of the specific technologies they're looking at to decarbonize that industry?
One of the most promising technologies is hydrogen reduction steelmaking. It's a mouthful, but essentially it replaces the coal traditionally used in steelmaking with hydrogen, which doesn't produce carbon emissions when burned.
So instead of belching out smoke and soot, steel mills could be running on clean hydrogen. That's a pretty radical shift. What about other industries? Are there similar innovations happening in, say, the chemical sector?
Absolutely. They're looking at things like using renewable energy sources to power chemical plants and developing new processes that are less energy intensive and relying on more sustainable feedstocks. They're even exploring the possibility of capturing carbon emissions from chemical plants and using them as raw materials to create new products.
Wait, what? Turning pollution into products? That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
It might sound futuristic, but it's a real thing. It's called carbon capture and utilization, or CCU, and it's one of the many exciting technologies that Japan is considering supporting through this bond framework. They're also looking at ways to decarbonize the cement industry, which is another major emitter. One approach involves using alternative materials, like fly ash or slag, which are industrial byproducts, to replace some of the cement and concrete. They're also exploring the use of carbon capture technologies to trap the emissions from cement kilns.
It's like they're going through each of these heavy industries and saying, okay, how can we make this cleaner? greener and more sustainable.
Precisely. And they're not just throwing money at the problem, they're taking a very strategic approach. They're identifying the most promising technologies, setting clear goals, and then providing the financial support needed to make those innovations a reality.
It's a pretty impressive roadmap.
Yeah.
But one question that pops into my mind is, how do they know which technologies to bet on? I mean, green technology is evolving so rapidly. How do they avoid investing in something that turns out to be a dead end?
That's a great question, and it's one that they've clearly given a lot of thought to. They have a multi-layered process for evaluating and selecting projects to ensure that the bond proceeds are being used responsibly and effectively.
So it's not just a matter of, hey, this sounds cool, let's fund it. There's a lot of due diligence involved.
Absolutely. It starts with each relevant ministry or agency, making sure potential projects align with the eligibility criteria outlined in the framework. Then there's this group of high-level officials from various ministries who get together to review those compliance checks and make recommendations.
So it's a team effort, with experts from different areas weighing in on the potential of each project.
Exactly. And if they need more information, they can consult with outside experts and organizations. It's a very thorough process.
But it doesn't stop there, right? I mean, these are public funds we're talking about.
You're right. The final decision rests with the National Diet, which is Japan's legislature. They need to approve the funding for these projects as part of the annual government budget.
So it's not just bureaucrats making decisions in a vacuum. The elected representatives have the final say. That's a good system of checks and balances.
It is. And it ensures that the bond proceeds are being used for projects that have broad public support. And let's not forget about the environmentally sustainable management of living natural resources and land use category we touched on earlier.
Right. That's the one that focuses on managing forests, farmland, and fisheries in a sustainable way. It might seem a bit off topic compared to things like green steel and hydrogen-powered airplanes, but it's actually incredibly important.
It is. Those natural systems play a critical role in absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, and they're essential for biodiversity and the overall health of the planet.
Plus, Japan is a small island nation with limited land area, so they have to be very careful about how they manage their natural resources.
Exactly. They're looking at things like promoting sustainable farming practices, using renewable energy in agriculture and forestry, and protecting their forests from deforestation. They're even investing in research to develop new types of crops that are more resistant to climate change.
It's amazing how interconnected all these different pieces are. It's not just about individual technologies or sectors. It's about transforming the entire system.
That's the key takeaway here. Japan is taking a holistic approach to sustainability, and this climate transition bond framework is the financial engine driving that transformation.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture goals, the specific sectors they're targeting, and the process for selecting and funding projects. But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't discussed yet. How do they actually measure the success of all this? How do they know if these investments are making a real difference?
That's where the monitoring and reporting comes in. And this is another area where Japan is really setting a high bar.
So they're not just throwing money at these projects and hoping for the best. They're actually tracking the progress and the results.
Absolutely. They're committed to transparency and accountability. Japan plans to publish detailed annual reports on how the bond proceeds are being used, which projects are being funded, and the environmental impact of those projects. It's not just about numbers either. They also want to share the stories behind these projects.
Stories? What do you mean?
Think case studies, real-world examples of how these projects are being implemented, the challenges they're facing, and the lessons they're learning along the way. It's a fantastic way to share knowledge and best practices, which could help accelerate the global transition to a greener economy. Imagine being able to see how a steel mill in Japan successfully switched from coal to hydrogen, and then applying those lessons to a similar project in another country.
It's like open sourcing the green transition. I love that idea. It's not just about Japan going it alone. It's about sharing their knowledge and helping to create a global ecosystem of innovation.
Precisely. And that brings us to another important point. This climate transition bond framework isn't set in stone. It's designed to be a living document, constantly evolving to reflect the latest scientific research, technological advancements, and feedback from stakeholders.
So it's not a one-and-done deal. They're actually planning to revisit and revise the framework on a regular basis.
Exactly. They've committed to reviewing the framework at least every 5 years, but they're also open to making adjustments more frequently if needed. Think about how much technology has changed in just the past 5 years. The pace of innovation in the green tech space is incredible, so they need to be flexible and adaptable. What works today might not be the best approach 5 years from now.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like they're saying, we're committed to this long-term goal of green transformation, but we're also realistic about the fact that the path to get there might change along the way.
It's a very pragmatic approach, and I think it's one of the reasons why this framework is so promising. They're not just chasing the latest fads or trends, they're taking a long-term strategic view and building in mechanisms to adapt and evolve as the situation changes.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored Japan's ambitious goals for green transformation, the specific sectors they're targeting, the innovative technologies they're supporting, and the rigorous processes they've put in place to ensure accountability and transparency. It's clear that they're taking this challenge seriously. What are your overall thoughts on this approach?
I'm genuinely impressed. They're not just talking about a green transition, they're actually putting their money where their mouth is, and they're doing it in a way that's strategic, transparent, and, dare I say, a little bit inspiring. They're showing the world that it's possible to use finance as a powerful tool to drive real, meaningful change.
I totally agree. It's a refreshing change of pace to see a government taking such a proactive and holistic approach. But as with any ambitious plan, there are bound to be challenges along the way. What are some of the potential roadblocks or hurdles they might face?
Well, one challenge is simply the scale and complexity of the task at hand. We're talking about transforming entire industries and systems, not just tweaking things around the edges. That's going to require a massive amount of coordination, investment, and innovation. There's also the risk of technological dead ends. Green technology is still evolving rapidly, and it's possible that some of the technologies they're betting on might not pan out as expected.
Yeah, that's always a possibility in any cutting-edge field. But it sounds like they've built in some safeguards with their review process and their willingness to adapt the framework as needed.
That's true. They're not being rigid or dogmatic about their approach. And I think that flexibility will be key to their success. Another challenge is the global nature of climate change. Even if Japan achieves all of its ambitious goals, it won't be enough if other countries aren't pulling their weight.
That's the big question, isn't it? Will this model of government-led green investment catch on? Will other countries follow Japan's lead and start putting their own financial muscle behind the green transition? Only time will tell. But I think Japan is setting a powerful example.
I couldn't agree more. It's a bold experiment, and the world will be watching closely to see how it unfolds.
So for you, our listener, what does this all mean? Well, Japan is showing the world that it's possible to take bold action on climate change, while also creating economic opportunities. They're proving that sustainability and prosperity don't have to be at odds with each other. But here's the big question to ponder as you watch Japan's green experiment unfold. Will this model of government-led green investment be enough to avert the worst impacts of climate change? Or will it take a more fundamental shift in our global economic systems and consumption patterns? That's something to think about as you navigate your own journey towards a more sustainable future.
Beautifully said. It's a fascinating time to be alive. And Japan's climate transition bond framework is just one example of the incredible innovation happening in the world of climate solutions. Keep your eyes open, stay curious, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the technologies and ideas that are shaping a greener future.